It was summer in South Wales. Thursday, 13th of July 1922 to be exact. It had been a cooler, wetter month than normal, and this day was no different. There was no gentle evening sun slanting from above the hills. The clouds were in the way again. A bearded man of average height was standing on the station, looking through the arches of a bridge towards the junctions and loco sheds beyond. Next to him, a tank engine simmered in the bay platform, waiting for her turn to leave for Aberdare. The man turned and glanced at his watch as he did so. Still some minutes before the train would leave. For a moment, he seemed to see something else. A rain-swept platform with no structures save for a basic brick shelter. Bays filled and a road replacing most of the tracks. A place uncared for by anyone, save for those who remembered or knew the history. At least he knew that this was the right place and time. Anyone less time-sensitive would have been oblivious to the sudden change. He raised his hat to the driver as he passed by, checking his locomotive, and received a polite, "Good evening, sir," in return. This was the train he needed. It carried something wrong. What, he didn't know, but it already caused that minor time skip. He selected a third-class compartment and settled into a corner seat, setting his hat and overcoat on the rack above. He let his senses reach out. There was something here. Something weak, but strong enough to interfere with time. He was distracted as the door opened, and a small, fussy-looking man in glasses climbed in, carrying a Gladstone bag. They exchanged greetings, and the small man managed to drop a copy of the Free Press, which the other handed back to him. "Oh, thank you, sir. I fear I am a little clumsy today. I had not planned on this journey. It's a little unsettling." "Oh, not at all, sir. Are you travelling far tonight?" "Only as far as Cwm. Of course I have to change, but there is more than enough time to reach a low-level station. Oh, by the way, my name is Tully, Harold Tully." "Leo Griffiths, at your service." "Do you travel far, Mr. Griffiths?" To Aberdare, then down the valley to Abercynon. The long way around, but the Cardiff train left here too early."
"How annoying for you."
Leo nodded and glanced across as a man and woman joined him in the compartment. Tully moved his bag so he was sitting across from Leo, and the other two sat on the other side of the compartment. Gaps between everyone, but particularly between strangers, Leo noted with a smile. The newcomers smiled, and everyone settled to wait for the train to leave. They didn't have to wait for long. There was a shrill whistle from the guard, followed by a response from the engine, and the train pulled out of the platform. Leo watched the station slide by and saw the approach road pass through rail level and up to the level of the bridge. He always enjoyed travelling on trains and watching the scenery. His companions were less interested. Tully was reading his newspaper, and the other two were leaning forward, talking to each other. He reached out again, even as his eyes were focused on the engine shed as the train passed by. Something on this train. It wasn't in this compartment, but somewhere. He could just sense it. It was a focus. It wouldn't do anything by itself, but something from outside had found it, was using it. He had told Tully the truth. He had a ticket to get to Abercynon, but he would leave earlier if he sensed the thing leaving the train. The compartment rocked slightly as it rounded the curve and over some points. They passed over the canal. Oh, that wouldn't change much in the future, Leo noted to himself. A minute or so later, the train stopped at Clarence Street Station, and he returned his attention to his immediate surroundings. No one joined them, and then the loco gently moved, and with the slightest of jerks they were off again. As they passed under the line heading up the Eastern Valley, Leo could still feel the focus on the train. It was changing now, maybe growing stronger. It wasn't much difference, but there was something. Was it feeding off something that had happened? There'd never been a major accident on this line. What else has happened in this valley? They were now properly in the Glyn Valley, running along the floor while off to the right was the road on a higher level. Tully was still reading, and the couple were now looking out of the windows. Nothing was bothering them. They passed under a minor bridge and continued towards the colliery, wheels clicking on the track as a little drizzle started to fall. The clicking stopped as the whole train swayed. The driver applied the brakes. The greyish light of a cloudy evening was gone to be replaced by a glowing orange fog. The train came to a halt. Tully lowered his paper and gasped at what he saw. The couple were talking to each other in worried voices, holding hands. Leo lowered the window for a closer look at the outside world, then checked his watch.
Where are we?
Tully asked him. Exactly where we were, Mr. Tully.
But that light.
Street lights lighting up some fog. Unfortunately, they won't be introduced for another 50 years or so.
What are you on about, man? You're upsetting my wife.
Leo turned to look at the couple on the other side of the compartment and took a card from his pocket, which he held out to the man. Mr.
Watkins.
He took the offered card and looked at it.
Leo Griffiths, investigator. What do you investigate, Mr. Griffiths?
Things that need investigating. Such is why this train is sitting on the A472 on Sunday the 5th of March in the year 2000. He looked at his watch again. 3 minutes past 3 in the morning. They all looked at him. Tully was the first to speak.
I'm familiar with the work of H.G. Wells, but your suggestion borders on the ludicrous.
Undoubtedly it does, Mr. Tully. Unfortunately, it is when we are. Doubly unfortunate if a car should come along. He looked out of the window as a movement caught his eye. It was a driver walking back to speak to the guard. Driver, we need to talk.
Oh, sorry for the delay, sir. We seem to have a problem.
Oh, well put, sir. One moment. Leo opened the door and jumped onto the road, offering the driver his card. What's your name?
Jack Thomas, sir.
Mr. Thomas, Jack. Don't move away from the train and try to keep touching it. Leo was resting his hand on the frame of the carriage as he spoke, and smiled as he saw the other man do the same. Well, if you looked around and it wasn't so foggy, what has happened would be more obvious. What you would see would be this valley, with a few changes.
What's going on then?
Well, this train has been temporarily displaced by almost 78 years. It's moved in time, Jack. Probably it won't stay here long, but if you move too far away, you could be left behind when it returns.
Mr. Griffiths.
Oh, Leo, please. Yes, it sounds strange and impossible. Look at this road. Touch it. It's real. This is what happens to the railway years after it closes. The train is in the same place, just at the wrong time.
Leo, how could this happen?
Leo rubbed his beard, trying to think of how to explain. Jack, imagine a railway line. That line is time. Everyone travels along that line and other passengers join and leave them as they pass through their lives. Everyone has a single ticket for a journey, but there are things that will try and join the train without a ticket. Maybe just for the fun of it or to steal something for the train. They can play with the signals, prevent the train from stopping at the station, or change the point so it gets diverted. That's what's happened here.
I think I see what you're getting at. You some sort of ticket inspector then?
Leo smiled. Oh, that would be a suitable description for the analogy.
What can we do?
Well, for now, go back to your engine. Keep her ready to move. When the rails return, check that no one is out of the train and start going. This section could be powering the time jump. There were heads looking out of the windows above them.
Please stay on the train, Jack said. We're on the move as soon as we can.
The heads withdrew as he walked back to the engine, keeping a hand on the train as he did so. Leo climbed back into his compartment to see the others looking at him.
Well?
Tully asked. A driver will get underway as soon as he can, which is when 1922 returns.
How long will that be?
Watkins asked. That is a good question, Leo replied. It would help to know why we shifted to this place. What makes it different to the rest of the line? His thick eyebrows lowered as he glared out of the window, giving him a more animalistic look.
Are we by the ponds?
Mrs. Watkins asked.
Oh, yes, I happened to look out of the window just before we stopped,
Tully replied. Do you know something about them, Mrs. Watkins? Leo asked, turning his attention to her.
Well, not very much. There was something that happened a long time ago. I think it was in the late 1860s, 1868 maybe. Some people went out in a boat and it sank. About 9 or 10 people died.
That could be it. Well done, Mrs. Watkins. It would be local, but the emotional force would be very strong. If enough people thought about it when they travelled past on this line, then it could provide a boost for it. The focus probably locked onto it as a source of power. But why send the train into the future?
What is doing this is not important. What is important is how it will get back.
What is doing it is extremely important, Mr. Watkins. The focus is allowing this to happen. The problem is there could be anything from a button to what seems to be a person.
It seems to be?
Oh, yes, Mr. Tully. It could take the form of someone who had a strong connection to an area. Though there was something back at Pontypool Road which makes that less likely, unless... No. This thing doesn't seem powerful to reanimate. It probably is just an item. Something someone has on this train. But why the future? What is special about this time? No line? Will you stop jabbering and do something? Watkins exploded, not just derailing Leo's train of thought, but tearing up the track as well. Mr. Watkins, once the focus is identified, then it can be removed from this train. That requires as much information as possible, including the motivations behind the train being here at this point in time.
Are you sure that we're meant to be here at this moment?
Tully asked. Oh, that's a good question, Mr. Tully. It's possible that the approximate time is correct, to the year anyway, but maybe not the month or the time of day. Maybe it wants... Leo was interrupted again, this time by the train shuddering and the orange fog outside being replaced by grey light and some drizzle. The engine whistled and the train started to move as Leo looked at his watch. 27 minutes past 6. No time was lost.
Is it over? Are we safe now?
Mrs. Watkins asked. Well, unlikely, Leo told her. The only way to be sure is to find and destroy the focus. It probably just ran out of energy. It couldn't keep the entire train there any longer.
The focus, as you call it, it was keeping us there?
Tully asked, frowning at Leo as he cleans his glasses. Oh yes, most things have what you could call temporal inertia. They will stay in the time they belong in unless some force moves them out of that time. Once the force weakens or disappears, they will snap back to the time they belong to. The thing that is using the focus lacks that inertia. It is effectively outside time. It still knows where the focus is. Destroying it will remove its ability to affect anything or anyone here. He looked at the others as the train ran through the colliery. Tully and Mrs. Watkins were worried, but seemed to be listening to what he said. Watkins just seemed to be scared, probably on behalf of his wife as much as himself. It occurred to Leo that he'd probably fought in the Great War, which could explain his reactions. He sat back and tried to think about what could happen next as the train approached Havadrunnis. It had reacted to the Glyn Ponds. What else could have happened along this line? A boy of about 11 years was watching the trains that entered the cut-in approaching the Glyn Tunnel. He waved as the tank engine came near and Jack and his fireman waved back. He watched it enter the tunnel. As the rear carriage passed out of sight, there was a sudden silence. Not a fading away of noise, but the sound of the train just stopped. A little smoke and steam drifting out of the tunnel mouth was the only sign that the train had just passed. The darkness of the tunnel was the only thing that could be seen through the windows as the train dropped. There was a crunching noise and they came to a rapid halt. Leo pulled out his watch and looked at it. What he saw caused him to frown. As he looked up, he saw Tully looking at him. The same day as before, Mr. Tully. It's now 7 minutes past 3 in the morning. Interesting.
Oh, why interesting?
Well, it is the same amount of time that passed in 1922. Was it tied at this time, or doesn't it have much control? Leo glanced at the window and lowered it. There was a sound of footsteps crunching their way towards them. Then a voice called him. Leo! He opened the door so he could speak to the driver without hanging out of the window. Jack, it happened again. Oh, the rails have gone and I can't see the way out. Oh, it's like the tunnel has been sealed. Oh, it has, Jack. Both ends are covered now. What can we do? Oh, stay calm. Tell everyone to do the same. Then go back to the engine and keep her simmering nicely. Well, it seems that we can't be held in this time for long. The man looked uncertain, but nodded and called out to the other passengers, his voice echoing around the tunnel's brickwork. Leo closed the door as the driver walked away. As he did so, he noticed that Tully was not looking well. Mr. Tully? The man was breathing quickly and spoke awkwardly. I'm sorry, Mr. Griffiths. I'm not very good at being underground. The tunnels don't affect me normally, but we're stuck here. It won't be long, Mr. Tully. I hope you are right. Leo glanced at the others. They were holding hands but seemed calm. The thought began to stir in his mind. The thought he'd almost had before, but still reluctant to surface. Tully, you will get out, but you have to control your breathing to calm down. Imagine a square. Start at the bottom corner and slowly breathe in as you move up the side. Now, hold it as you cross the top. Tully watched Leo's hand as it slowly traced a square. Now, breathe out as you go down the other side. Wait along the bottom. Now breathe in going up. wasn't long before Tully's breathing was under control and he seemed to be calmer. Leo smiled at him as he sat back in his seat, closing his eyes as he reached out with his mind. The focus had more power running through it. It should be easier to find. There. Just 2 compartments along. It was in there, but what was it? He should be able to identify when he saw it. The train shuddered as he returned his attention to the compartment, and a chirp from the engine signalled that they were on the move again. Tully obviously relaxed as he felt the motion and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief.
Oh, such a relief. I'm sorry for getting so worried before.
Mrs. Watkins smiled at him as Leo said, Not at all, Mr. Tully. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to be afraid of. The others looked at him as his expression changed. Afraid, that's it. How diabolical of it.
What's wrong?
Mrs. Watkins asked, her voice quavering slightly as her husband looked angrily at Leo. The reason it chose those places to move in time, Mrs. Watkins. Mr. Tully's phobia of being trapped underground and the terror of those people drowning in the pond. The entity using the focus was feeding off those emotions. This train can't cross the viaduct with the focus on it. As the train pulled into Havard on its platform, he wrenched the door open and ran to the engine. Jack, how long can you hold the train here?
Well, not very long. I have to explain why we're late.
Well, the coal's too good and Gwyn will make a mistake. He grinned at the fireman. Carriage door trouble? Good man. Whatever you do, don't move this train yet. It cannot cross the viaduct until the focus is destroyed. The driver nodded. I'll square it with the guard. Are you certain about this? Absolutely, Jack. Remember, it sent the train to a time without the railway. Think about that. As Leo moved off, the crew's expression revealed that they considered his meaning. He walked down the platform until he reached the compartment that contained the focus. He opened the door and smiled at the occupants, 2 middle-aged ladies. Oh, good evening, ladies. Apologies for disturbing you, but it's due to the problems we've been having on this journey. It's a strange one today, isn't it? Leo's attention was drawn to the small brooch when the woman was wearing it. He pointed at it. Where did you get that brooch?
Well, Ma'am gave it to me after she died, like. One of her ladies gave it to her when she was in service. Wedding present, Ma'am said it was. Made of old silver coins someone dug up, she said.
Oh, interesting. Well, unfortunately, it's a reason for all these problems. Would you consider giving it up? With full compensation, of course.
Oh, it depends what you want to pay for it, love.
Would £20 be enough? The woman was reaching for the brooch when she paused.
You really mean it? Ma'am's brooch is causing all this?
Oh, yes. Not directly, but it is allowing it to happen. Giving it up will save everyone on this train. She unhooked the brooch and handed it over, accepting the banknotes in return. Oh, thank you, Leo said before walking away from the train. He turned the brooch over in his hands. It was silver and fairly old. Would melting it be enough? He had to be sure. There were too many lives depending on him. He stood facing towards Tonkareg, for his eyes were focused on a more distant point. Pardus, Tigris, this one needs your help. What will destroy this focus? The information entered his mind as if his friends were speaking to him. Pardus added in a joke as was his wont. He ran back to the engine. Oh, Jack, we can leave it. This is melted on the fire. He held out the brooch. The driver looked at him. It'll be enough to stop it? Oh, yes, provided it starts to melt before we reach the viaduct. Jack nodded. You better come along with us. Make sure it's done right, like. You might have to clear it with the people at Crumlin if they see you. Leo produced another banknote from his pocket. Oh, that should help. I'll climb in. Leo climbed into the cab and watched as Gwyn expertly shovel coal. When the fire was ready, Jack sounded the whistle and they moved off. Leo put the brooch on the shovel and watched as Gwyn held it over the fire, as close to the hot coals as he could. As they approached the junction with the line down to Llanillith, he could sense the energy fading as the brooch began to lose its shape. He held his breath as they moved on to the viaduct. The brooch was little more than a pool of metal now. He glanced out of the cab. Jack had his eyes firmly fixed ahead, seemingly refusing to think of what could go wrong, but still keeping the engine at the low speed required. Leo whispered to Gwyn, and at the right moment the fireman took the shovel out of the firebox and threw the molten metal over the side of the viaduct. It fell 200 feet and hissed in the waters of the Ebu. When the train finally pulled into Crumlin High Level after a seemingly interminable viaduct crossing, the three of them finally relaxed. 6:39 exactly. Oh, not bad after what happened on the way here. The rest of the journey should be less interesting, Leo said, shaking hands with Jack and Gwyn. No one was paying attention to them, so he slipped them each a 10-shilling note. Have a pint or 3 after work. Tully was leaving the train as Leo reached his compartment. The Watkins were already down the platform. Oh, goodbye, Mr. Tully. Hopefully the trip to come will be less eventful.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Griffiths. I assume you found your focus.
He looked around as Leo nodded. There was no one close by.
Tell me, in that future year we were in, was the viaduct there?
Leo shook his head. No, it had been gone for 30 years by then.
Ah, in that case you have my thanks for your work. Goodbye.
Leo stepped into the compartment as Tully walked along the platform. He'd paid for a ticket to Abercynon, so he might as well use it. It'd been a long time since he'd been there. The last time was with that fellow Trevithick and his locomotive. Things had probably changed since then. As the engine whistled and the train moved off towards Treowen, he relaxed in his seat and prepared to enjoy the journey.